Well, with a bit more rain and now some sunshine, I reckon we gardeners are getting a good deal this year. I'm certainly pleased with the way some of the plants are growing in my own garden. Just look at this, for example. This is Dame's Violet, or Sweet Rocket, and it's as common as muck, this plant. You see it growing all over the country on embankments and verges, but it's not actually a native. It was introduced into gardens, and from there it escaped into the countryside. So you can see how easy it is to grow. It will seed itself all over the place, producing either these lovely lilac flowers or white flowers, so you get rather a nice mixture too. We really shouldn't shun some of these plants because they're common. Another good case in point is our foxglove. Now that's as common as anything too, but another plant that will seed itself all over the place and a really good one to have. Well, later on in the programme, I want to prove to you how easy it is to garden with herbaceous plants, and I'm also busy in the vegetable garden. But first of all, I'm doing my daily update on the garden. Gardeners, of course, need to keep one or preferably two jumps ahead. So it really is quite important to go around the garden every day, enjoy the plants, of course, but also think about what you've got to do for the future. Now, this lupin is a perfect case in point. I raised that one from seed, which I bought from a specialist lupin grower at the Chelsea Flower Show. And I'd like to keep that colour. But lupins, of course, don't come true from seed, so there's no point in collecting the seed from it. I've got to take cuttings from that in the spring. Now, you can bet your life that in the spring I'm going to forget which plant it was I wanted to take cuttings from. So right now, while it's in flower, I'm going to stick this cane in here with a little tag on it. Right now, of course, it won't notice, but once this stuff has died down, it'll stand out like a sore thumb and remind me what I've got to do. And that red colour is going to look wonderful in my hot border. Inspired by Carol Klein's garden the other week, I too want to plant a hot border. And I've started with Lychnis arkwrightii, which I think is one of the most vibrant reds in the whole garden. That one we raised from seed collected from our own plant, so that's particularly satisfying. But I also want to plant some of my favourite herbaceous plants, the penstemons. These are wonderful because they come in a whole range of colours, and they'll produce bell-shaped flowers for literally months. Now, they do have one snag, and that is that some varieties are a little bit tender. But I find that the ones with the small leaves are the ones that are most likely to survive the frost. And this one, Evelyn, for example, I think will survive almost anywhere in the country and produce these lovely pink bells with a red tip. And this one is one of my all-time favourite plants. It's Penstemon garnet, and it produces these lovely big bells for months on end. Now, those pyrethrum were planted just a week ago. I wanted to prove that it could be done, planting them in full flower. And they're obviously a little bit windblown, but they're going to survive. So now I'm going to do exactly the same thing with Anthemis sanctii johannis. This is a really strong yellow colour and will look wonderful here. The secret of success is to dig up a really big root ball, and once it's planted, give it a whole can full of water.
Last time I was in this small garden at Barnsdale, I didn't quite have time to finish my vertical planting. And the last job I was going to do was to plant a clematis here to grow up into this cherry. Now, I've put the roots about a yard away from the trunk so that they don't compete with the roots of the cherry, and they're also on the darker side, the shady side, so they'll keep cool. But eventually that clematis will grow up into the tree and provide a lovely second flush of bloom after the cherry blossom's over. Well, of course, that sort of arrangement is informal, as is all the planting so far in the garden. What I want to do this week is to bring in a touch of formality. And formal planting is about geometry, symmetrical shapes, straight rows, circles, and so on. In fact, something as simple as putting two little box plants at the end of this grass path can make the difference between a path that leads nowhere and thus the makings of a little vista stop. That's a touch of formality. But the people who were really hot on formal gardening, of course, were the Victorians. And their bedding displays you can still see, well, at least in the Victorian style, in parks and gardens all over the country. And when I laid out this small garden here, I wanted to separate off a little piece of garden that I could have a touch of Victoriana. So I planted some box plants, and I've just clipped those. They're not quite hedge yet, but they won't be long before they thicken out into hedge. And then I'm going for a very, very simple bedding scheme here, because the great danger is making bedding too fussy. And I wanted, really, just one colour of these gazanias. In fact, all I was able to get was a blend of orange shades, but that's at least nearly simple. And I'm arranging those planted fairly dense, and then amongst them, one other plant only, and that's the heliotrope, cherry pie. Has a lovely scent to the flowers, and the dark foliage and the purple of the blooms is going to make a very nice contrast with the gazanias. And I'll just be replicating that type of a pattern right across the bed. Well, these are all the same size now as they're going in, but in time the heliotropes will come up taller and the gazanias will stay at the same height but spread out, so there'll be an interesting height difference as well as colour. And don't forget that colour comes from foliage as well as flower, so you can get as exciting a mix of colours with different foliages as flowers, but still keep it simple, keep it down to about 2. And then as a finishing touch, because the Victorians love to have a dot plant at the centre of their bedding displays, I'm putting this little upright box, and that will last for years and years, of course. Well, it may not exactly be a spreading, elegant parterre, but when you consider what a tiny little space it is, I think it does just lend a touch of 19th century elegance. Now, one of the problems with planting up a garden from scratch is that there's an awful lot of space to fill. And I haven't got all the perennials and shrubs that I want in this first year, and anyway, I've got to make room for those that are here to expand. So that means if I want a full garden this season, I've got to go for a fair bit of temporary planting. And I'm doing that on a semi-formal basis here with just a simple blend of pale blue ageratums and then these white dwarf tobacco plants, and that'll make a lovely little cool colour spot there. These, of course, are annuals, so at the end of the season they'll be done for. But over here, I've done something similar with tender perennials. There's something really special about these tender perennials. I love the colours. They're so clean and bright. Just look at that chrysanthemum, pink with a lovely chocolate centre. And, of course, once they've started flowering, they go on right through summer into autumn. But being tender, they won't survive a normal English winter, unless, of course, you take cuttings and overwinter those on a windowsill or in a greenhouse. The alternative is to buy new ones next year, but that's expensive. And in fact, all the plants that I've purchased in this garden would have been far cheaper if I'd propagated them myself. And besides that, it's quite nice to mix and match and swap with friends, especially if you can have plants in your own garden that you remember your friends by. For the final piece of formal planting, I want to combine utility with beauty. And I've taken the theme set by the fan train Morello cherry and copied that at ground level using a collection of herbs in a fairly geometric arrangement. Now, these are planted very close together, but that's intentional because what I shall be doing is clipping these, and eventually these will merge to form a continuous band of vegetation, but with colours running silver, green, gold, green, gold. And then, as a finishing touch, I'm going to put low-growing thyme in the foreground. Some of it I don't mind if it spills right out onto this paving, because the sun, when it shines on the concrete slabs, will cause them to get hot, and that will cause the aromatic oils to vaporise and make a lovely fragrant corner. All I've got to do now is just finish clipping this rosemary here.
Well, Nigel, I never doubted for a moment, of course, that it would look good, but I think it's absolutely terrific. You must be very pleased.
Well, I'm quite pleased with it, Jeff. There's plenty of colour, and it's only had 4 months to develop. It's looking fairly mature, but, of course, there are 1 or 2 mistakes. It's a bit overcrowded. Round that conifer, for instance, I've got the perennials right up against it, and I think if I leave them there, that's going to kill the bottom, and then it'll be a bit sort of untidy in the winter.
Yes, but on the other hand, I think you need that bit of encouragement at the start, you know, if you can afford it. And that would certainly encourage me to continue. But what are you going to do about it?
Well, it's simple, because they're perennials, so you can move them at any time. But I'll wait until the autumn and then shift some of them out of the way, and that'll make more room, and I can give any surplus to neighbours or friends. I'll tell you what, Jeff, there's a bit of serendipity here. There are two Achilleas here. They're both supposed to be the same variety, but what I've ended up with is the darker one, Moonshine, and then this pale one, Flowers of Sulphur. I love this two-tone effect, so that's an accident I shall keep.
Well, what a disappointment, Nigel. I thought you'd intended to do that.
I shouldn't have admitted it was an accident, should I?
Well, if you've been following Nigel's plans, but you feel it's a little bit too much to take in at one time, there's an in-depth article in the Gardener's World magazine, and that's the new August issue. For Dr. Harold Hughes, the onset of summer promises hours of absorbed interest, for his passion is butterflies. Unfortunately, butterfly habitats are fast disappearing from the countryside, putting many species at risk. And Harold is chairman of Butterfly Conservation.
There's a lot gardeners can do to help butterflies, and in doing so they'll help themselves, because butterflies add another beautiful dimension to one's garden. Many people think of them, for example, as flying flowers.
It's a lovely thought, Harold. But on the other hand, I'm very keen to protect wildlife, of course, but I'm a gardener and I don't want to fill my garden with singing nettles.
Well, you don't have to. You can put into your garden all those nectar plants that butterflies like. We have this concept of the butterfly pub, the place where butterflies happily come in for a snack when they're en route from one place to another. There are other things that gardeners can do. They can badger their councils not to cut down hedgerows or to tidy up pieces of waste ground or to cut roadside verges. All those things help butterflies.
I love the idea of a butterfly pub. So what sort of plants have I got to plant to create this?
Well, the best single plant must be the buddleia. It's not called the butterfly bush for nothing, but there are many other kinds of plants that are quite acceptable in gardens: lavender, field scabious, candytuft, verbena. There's quite a long list of plants which are quite suitable and butterflies love.
Are there any particular colours, you think, that butterflies prefer?
We believe that purple and white seem to be the most favoured. We're not quite sure why. We know that butterflies see in infrared, so there may be some particular element of that which attracts butterflies. But of course they learn which are the plants with the best nectar.
And are there any plants that they particularly don't like?
Well, some plants are really of no interest at all to butterflies. Roses, I have to say, although they're beloved of gardeners. But there, if you want to grow roses, then you underplant your roses with other plants they do like, the low-growing plants like white arabis, French marigold and the like. But I think the most important thing is to keep this big spread and diversity of plants in your garden the whole year to attract butterflies right through the season.
OK, so if I do plant this wide diversity, what sort of butterflies am I going to attract?
Well, you'll see the comma probably in your garden. That's one that has benefited from gardens and is now one, sadly, of the few butterflies which is more common than it was apparently in the 1920s. But other butterflies like small tortoiseshells, peacocks, red admirals, painted ladies, they're amongst the most common, but they're luckily amongst the most beautiful, and they will come into your garden. If you live near woodland, you may be successful in attracting the purple hairstreak, or even more difficultly, the small pearl-bordered fritillary. You may, if you live near the south, see cloudy yellows coming across in their search for clover fields.
When you say coming across, what do you mean?
I mean they come across the channel. That's how they get here. Some of the butterflies that we regard as native to this country, in fact, migrate to the UK every year. Quite a fact when you think that they have to fly across the channel.
One of the things that's disappointed me a bit this year, Harold, is that I haven't seen the small tortoiseshell or the peacock butterflies that I normally do.
No, they're still in the pupal stage. They won't come out until it gets warmer. They don't like the cold any more than we do. The pupal stage is actually quite interesting. It's also called the chrysalis. That comes from the Greek word chrysis for gold, because some of the chrysalis are quite strongly marked with gold or perhaps silver colouring.
Supposing I do want to breed butterflies, what can I do?
You can put a larval food plant in your garden. Things like garlic mustard. Nettle is probably the best because that attracts the common species. And your children can breed butterflies quite easily by having the food plant in jam jars of water and feeding up the larvae and watch them go through chrysalis into butterfly.
Are the caterpillars actually going to damage garden plants?
No, I would like to dispel any idea that butterflies damage garden plants. Only 2 species of white butterfly will eat your cabbage, and you can stop that happening by hiding the cabbage under other flowers.
OK, but supposing I do get a plague of them, what about spraying?
You mustn't.
Well, I'm certainly not going to spray. Harold, thank you very much. Well, if you want to help butterflies, then write to this address. There are lots of publications that you can buy, and you can get free advice. And, of course, you can join butterfly conservation yourself. I know I'm going to.
Yes, this old house is the headquarters of the Somerset Fire Brigade. But the gardening interest becomes apparent when you realise it's actually Hestercombe House, and the garden here is the supreme example of the collaboration between Gertrude Jekyll and Edwin Lutyens. But as it is the Fire Brigade, this must be the way to see it. OK, Mike, let's go. It really is absolutely breathtaking to see just what that remarkable couple achieved. Because Miss Jekyll was already a fairly old lady when she met young Lutyens towards the end of the last century. She'd actually got failing eyesight, and this is what had forced her to give up her embroidery and take up painting with plants instead. And he was already set on a career that was eventually to mark him as the finest British architect of the century. And here at Hestercombe, he designed this garden for its owner, Edward Berkeley Portman, and then she came and planted it with absolutely matchless style. Almost as soon as the garden was finished in 1908, Country Life magazine ran a series of articles explaining the way in which Lutyens had set about designing it, and they said, "It was below this terrace that Mr. Lutyens' main walled and terraced garden lies, consisting, broadly speaking, of a main central plat, 2 side terraces and a southern pergola. To the sides of the old terrace he's added on the west the little plat set with roses and headed by an arboured alcove," and here it is, still surviving 80 years later. From this balcony you get a very good view of some of Lutyens' interesting design features. And I actually find Hestercombe a very tantalising garden, because although you believe you can see a great deal of it at one glance, in fact there are enticing features just beyond the walls and the terraces, and so Lutyens has very ingeniously provided us with spy holes through which we can glimpse the areas beyond. This superb garden really was the supreme collaboration between 2 great talents. You just can't separate the relative importance of Lutyens and Jekyll in creating it. It was, in fact, Lutyens' commission. He designed the garden, but he needed Jekyll to plant it, and she used his hard stonework, his hard framework, over which and among which she put her plants. She used soft clump-forming plants to break the hard line of the paths. She used lavender, a plant she was very fond of, not only on the paths, but to tumble over the edge of the terraces and break the hard line. And in this bed here we can see what I think is another of Jekyll's hallmarks, the use of spiky plants like the echinops and eryngium, the sea holly. And of course within these plantings she was ensuring that she'd chosen things to give a continuity of interest right through the season. But after the end of the war the garden fell into disrepair. The stonework crumbled and Jekyll's plantings virtually disappeared. Then because of death duties the garden was sold. It passed eventually into the hands of the Fire Brigade, and they put in gardens to ensure that at least it was being looked after. They realised the historical importance, and then from 1973 onwards, a proper restoration programme began. And the man who knows about that today is the head gardener here, David Usher. David, the restoration work is basically now complete, isn't it?
That's correct. We started first on the planting schemes, and we've got them back as Miss Jekyll planned them. Now we're currently working on the stonework.
And I know that down here you've had some problems with restoring one of the rills, the little streams that run through the garden.
That's right. But it's been worth doing. We've got it now running as it should have been.
In many ways, David, though, running water isn't the first thing people think of in a Jekyll garden.
Well, Miss Jekyll, when she was a young lady, she would have done the grand tour, like all good Victorians, Italy and Spain, and seen this feature.
Yes, well, yes, indeed, running water very important in Mediterranean gardens.
That's right, yeah.
Yes, what you have in this border here is a very good example of Miss Jekyll's use of colour, isn't it?
Yes, this Cistus carborensis is a beautiful plant.
The sunrose.
Yes, and it's a very, very warm border.
And warmer still, hot, fiery colours in the middle.
Yes, but she then cools it off by using the gypsophila in the middle, which comes out and flows over the whole lot.
Well, this is her clever use of continuity again, isn't it? But I see you've got some bedding plants in here.
Well, we rebuilt this border during the winter, and we felt that just to fill a few of the gaps, and we've used some of these antirrhinums and things just to give a bit of extra colour and continuity as the plants mature.
And another of Miss Jekyll's spiky plants, red-hot poker.
Yeah, that new furrow is beautiful, especially at this time.
It's interesting, isn't it, David, to see what Lutyens did with the stream at the end of this terrace here.
I think Miss Jekyll gave him the idea of these Roman bathing tanks.
Can't imagine Miss Jekyll in a bathing costume. Oh, yes, but this is one of the areas you still have to restore, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, yes.
I think this beautiful pergola is one of the most lovely features in any English garden. It's all original, isn't it?
That's right, the piers and the uprights. These are the original oak crossbeams across here.
And the alternation of round pillars and square ones.
Well, Lutyens was trying to not just be twee, but he was actually using them because you've got different shadows on them. On the square ones, there's a hard shadow, and the soft one on the round pier.
And obviously Miss Jekyll made a lot of use of roses, which are not, admittedly, very interesting out of season. But clematis as well, I see. Is that her idea or yours?
Well, there were some clematis here, but we put those in just to give that extra continuity of colour and interest.
And I'm delighted to see you use labels on all of your plants. That rose, Alfred de Dalmar, that really is a beautiful rose at any period of history, isn't it?
Yeah, and a beautiful scent as well.
Another typically ingenious Lutyens touch is seen in the recessed risers on the stone steps. These give sharper shadows when the sun comes out, and also gave Miss Jekyll a little more space in which to put her plants. Here in this lovely wide central area, or Great Plat as it's called, Lutyens actually presented Miss Jekyll with a bit of a planting problem, because what he'd done was to create a rather intricate design, almost in many ways like the design of a medieval knot garden. One of the things it did allow her to do, though, because it's confined, she could make use of plants that give a succession of perfume, because I think the perfume is concentrated in this confined area, and so she had peonies in the early part of the season, followed by lilies later on. But the aspect of it that intrigues me most is the plants that she used to edge the borders, not lavender or cotton lavender or box, as you might imagine. Perhaps she thought those too fussy. She used a bold leaf plant instead, Bergenia, not the most obvious choice for this sort of planting. But there's very little ornament in the garden here at Hesticombe, the most notable exception being this sundial right in the middle of the central plat here. And on the face of it, this is a focal point. It's designed to take your eye. But such was the ingenuity of Lutyens as a designer that, in fact, although it does take your eye, he used diagonals. So you look beyond it to the end of the garden, and you take in the whole scene as well. Very clever indeed. And I think it's because of his ability to create this sort of feature, this sort of illusion, if you like, that Lutyens is so widely recognised as a garden designer of the very highest order indeed. And because its walls are enclosed, it inevitably gives much more protection for climbers. And it also has a wonderful position that gives superb views, not only of the rest of Hesticombe Garden, but also of a large part of the Somerset countryside. But I have to be honest and say that over the past few years, Hesticombe has become one of my very, very favourite English gardens. And within this garden, the creme de la creme must be that fabulous pergola. I think any gardener who sees that at the height of summer can only go down on their knees and say thank you. Thank you to Edwin Lutyens for his designing vision, and thank you to Miss Jekyll for the imagination of her planting.
The secret of success with keeping a succession of vegetables coming out of the vegetable garden is that as soon as one crop is finished, then you must whack in another one. Here on my deep beds, the spinach have given me a really good crop, but now they've run to seed, So it's time for them to come out and the next crop to go in. It's a good idea to revitalise the soil first, and a bucket full of compost will be enough for this sort of area, plus a couple of handfuls of general fertiliser. Just fork those into the top and it's ready for sowing. I like to sow a crop of broad beans at this time of the year. They will probably give me a crop of beans by the autumn, but even if they don't, the green tops make an ideal green vegetable with the typical broad bean flavour. There's a tremendous amount coming out of the vegetable garden right now, but it will be dangerous to get complacent. There's still plenty of time for sowing the salads, things like lettuce, radish, baby beet and baby carrots. And French beans will still do well now, and of course Chinese cabbage. And don't forget the winter storage varieties of the roots like beetroot, carrots and turnips. Moles really are a pain in the garden, and this recent wet weather has really brought them out. Well, I don't like killing them, so I was pleased to hear the other day of what is supposed to be a foolproof way of driving them into next door's garden. What you do is this. You look first of all for 2 mole hills, and then you dig down in between those two to find the run. Well, let's hope we're going to be lucky here. Yes, I think we are. Yes, you can see there's the run there. Now you buy yourself one of those silly musical birthday cars that are such fun for the first 10 minutes and then drive you terminally balmy. And you take out the little gadget inside that makes the music, and that goes into the hole. Put a little bit of slate over the top and just cover that up with soil. That will drive the moles dance crazy, and eventually they'll dance off into next door's garden. Well, next week, Nigel visits the Royal National Rose Society at St Albans to investigate the history of the rose. We'll also be paying a visit to the 2nd International Flower Show at Hampton Court. And, of course, I'll be back here at Barnsdale, keeping you up to date with what you should be doing in your garden. Goodbye.